did my time. I paid for my crime.
It's another big good evening going from me, Kervin, Julien, right here in the UK.
I paid for my crime.
Saturday night, 6 o'clock. It's that time again.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time.
You're listening to another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio, going out worldwide. That means we're right across the world.
Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals.
And I got a special guest on the show with me today. I was going to say this morning.
There was not a man I couldn't beat.
But it depends on what part of the world you're living in. It'll be morning, afternoon, or midday.
I had girls all over the street.
Evening here in the UK.
Life is so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being.
Once again, we revisit that old police brutality, kill by cop scenario.
With this living hell, already did my time.
My guest has got quite a few.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Well-voiced opinions, shall I say.
Already did.
And observations.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I wasn't
just noticed that we're only midway through
I never got high on my own supply.
February, and already there's 126 killed by cops already.
I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit.
With the wide rise of white supremacy
the life I used
in law enforcement and politics.
Young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump.
We take another look right here on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
Meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Stand by.
You up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
So fasten your seatbelts, get yourself a cup of coffee. 2 hours of intense conversation going on here.
My time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time. Paid for my crime. Already did my time. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had
my guest, Sevgi Fernandez,
money. Life is so sweet.
Will be with us shortly.
Changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a change.
Casting an eye over the stats over the last few years.
Being no gangster, life is too short to
as we open a discussion
trying to cope with this
on the increase of police brutality.
Did my time. I paid for my crime.
And our loved ones killed by cops.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my.
Now, as you know, we've done many shows on police brutality over the years.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
John Crawford, Tamir Rice.
I sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own.
Orlando Castile.
What I had to do, that's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to
just to name but some but a few.
Shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Ferguson might have been the start of Black Lives Matter,
real alligator,
but it definitely was not the start of our black folk being killed by cops or being attacked and brutalized.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
Being used as punch bags or excuses for people's anger and frustrations.
Prison.
cope with this.
But we're here again, my friends.
Trying to cope with this living here.
I'm hoping that we give you another understanding
Trying to cope with this living here.
of just how serious this issue is right across the United States of America.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Don't forget you can catch us live on www.worldjamglobalradio.com.
And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Or you can follow us on the TuneIn app if you have a smartphone.
Forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Pay for my crime.
World Jam Global Radio, this is clarity.
Drive-by killings, stop them. It ain't about nothing.
2 hours of uninterrupted discussion and conversation.
Let him cast the first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide.
And don't forget, you too can have your voice heard.
Knives.
You contact us on Issues Today or on World Jam Global Radio, or contact me directly, Kervin Julien. I'd like to introduce my guest, Sevgi Fernandez. Are you there, Sevgi?
I'm here, thank you.
And I have pronounced it right, haven't I?
You have.
Okay, well, maybe you could just start off by giving an introduction to our audience, telling them a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and then we'll talk about why you're here.
Absolutely. My name is Sevgi Fernandez, and I am born and raised in Oakland, California. I am mixed. My mother's white. My father is black. My father was a Black Panther. And so the issues facing the black community has always been something that's been a part of my life and my family. I am the mother of 3 wonderful boys, 6, 10, and 18. And I have my first baby girl on the way. I know, huh?
Congratulations.
Thank you. I am the founder of Together We Stand. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to dismantling racism, discrimination, and police brutality. We work on those issues through education, legislation, and advocacy. Majority of our work has been with families who have been victims of police brutality. And I'm really pleased to be here today to discuss these very pertinent issues going on in our society, things that are happening on a daily basis and so necessary for us to continue to share this until the masses actually realize the extent of what's happening and how dire things are at this point.
So how long have you been involved in activism, so to speak, or in the work of police brutality or supporting families and individuals?
It's been about 2.5 years, not very long. I stumbled into it sort of by accident. I think that Michael Brown's death was a catalyst for many of us. And after that, I wanted to get a dialogue going because I've always been an academic, and I started a blog discussing these issues and along with other things regarding racism and discrimination, and it went to 60 countries in a few months. So I thought I would start a Facebook group and sort of try to continue that. And within a few months, we had a lot of members and folks coming out saying, I've lost somebody to police brutality. I don't have any support. I don't know what to do. And so we sort of naturally morphed into what we are now, which is an advocacy organization. And it's been a very sharp learning curve for me. I certainly grew up aware of the issues, but I don't think, and I think this is the case for many people, if you don't, and this is sad that our media is the way that it is, and I'm really pleased that you're doing what you're doing, because if you don't look for it, or it doesn't specifically affect you and your family, the likelihood of people knowing how terrible this situation is very low. And I certainly knew there were issues, but I had no idea.
I mean,
how...
it's funny you should say that, because unless you actually have connections and contacts through social media, you won't see none of it. One of the first things that we identified when we started doing these types of shows of 3 to 4 years ago was that unless I had contact with the various people who I had, share the show with me, guest on the show with me, we weren't getting it over here in the UK. It wasn't part of our news. It wasn't in our newspapers. And funny you mentioned, Michael Brown was a catalyst for you. Michael Brown was a catalyst for many. You're quite right with that. But for us here in the UK, it went way back to Rodney King. Rodney King was the first time that it was ever evidence via video cam or anything. It was the first time that they were actually caught red-handed doing this kind of thing. But Rodney King wasn't the first either.
No.
And I suppose we've got better with social media and the internet, smartphones and cameras and videos on phones, etc. There's a constant recording now. But between Rodney King and Michael Brown, it's not that the police were quiet and people just weren't being brutalized. It's just that it wasn't reported.
Absolutely.
What knowledge do you have of, cases? You said Michael Brown was a catalyst for you, but there was obviously cases before Michael Brown, but they just weren't being reported or recorded as such, were they?
No, absolutely.
And you mentioned that it was something that you grew up with. So over here in the UK, we kind of talk about institutionalized racism. I think that the advantage we have here in the UK is that there is a lot of legislation put in place now that makes it very difficult for institutionalized racism to actually perform on the level that it used to perform on some years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But if truth be told, and to be perfectly honest, we've always kind of followed after America, as America being the mother country, so to speak, and whatever America did, we did. But I can't understand how America can be so far behind us as far as that legislation is concerned, when human rights and black rights and black activism started there long before it started here. What do you think? What do you think is a stumbling block to something being put down in stone, so to speak, that stops the authorities being able to brutalize our ethnic minorities in this way?
That's a pretty loaded question. I'll say this. I believe that our government is doing now what it was set up to do from inception. This country was built on racism, discrimination, oppression, and brutalization of people of color. Absolutely. And that has not changed. And the laws have not changed. And, if I had the magic answer as to how we can truly combat that and change that, I mean, that would be wonderful. I think that we are fighting an extremely dangerous and uphill battle, particularly now with the current administration. But I truly believe that the system is doing exactly what they want it to be doing and what it's been doing for all of these years. And we're just now a little bit more aware of how sadistic it is. Yeah.
You know, for a predominantly white nation, which the United States of America is, I don't think people get a real handle on how bad the situation is based on the statistics that are available as to the people that are killed by cops. Now, we did say prior to us coming on air, when me and you were conversing, that we would look from 2016. But I was looking at 2015, and I couldn't help myself because it's 1,146 killed in 2015, of which 7.69% were black. And of a predominantly white society, only 2.95, which doesn't tell a true story because that's not what your crime stats would say.
Correct.
Your crime stats wouldn't have that percentage of committed crime in that ethnicity. Native Americans, 5.49. Hispanics and Latinos 3.45, and it just seems to be a predominant reaction that, you know, anybody that's of different origin to a white Caucasian is that the police are quite quick to pull out their guns and open fire. Now, you mentioned that you have experienced racism from a young age. So would you mind sharing what was your earliest remembrances of racism as you know it growing up?
Sure. I think I have a bit of a different take on it, being half black, half white. I have sort of had an interesting journey, and I think that a lot of people that are mixed like me have had similar experiences. I think my first experience with racism was within my own family as a young girl. I had my parents separated when I was very, very young. I don't recall them being together. My dad lived on the East Coast and I lived in California. And I was quite literally the black sheep of my family. I was the only person of color out here. And so I learned at a very young age that I was not what they wanted me to be. So I think that was kind of where it started. And I think as I grew up, and I watched the struggles my father had, and I heard of his work and his struggles, and what my sisters, I have older sisters who actually experienced the desegregation in the schools in Boston and were bussed into white neighborhoods and brutalized. My experience was quite different, but I saw it in my home first, and then out in the world, and so I don't know.
how did that feel in the home for you? How did that make you feel in the home?
I felt like something was wrong with me. It was quite an interesting experience because my name is Sevgi, and my father named me that, and it means loved one. And when my parents split up and I went to live with my mother and her parents, they changed my name, and they named me Carrie. And no one spoke of my real name. So when I would visit my father, I was who I was, which was Sevgi, and I was beautiful, and I was a beautiful woman, a girl of color. And when I was at my mother's home, I was Carrie. There was no representation of that side of my family or that side of my culture. And it was very challenging.
Did you find it difficult trying to be who you were supposed to be, knowing that you're upsetting one or the other, or?
Absolutely. I think as a young kid, you don't know who you're supposed to be. You want your family to accept you and love you. And certainly there were aspects of that, but there was also the other side. And I think that it took me quite some years into my teens before I sort of was able to decide for myself who I thought I should be, who I wanted to be, who I was, and sort of accept that the things I'd sort of perceived and been told and taught as a child were not necessarily the truth, you know? And so as later on in my teens, I absolutely abolished the name Carrie, but it took me quite a long time to get to that place where I felt okay doing that, you know?
That's got to be tough. I mean, I as a black man here in the UK, I'm 56. I was born in the 60s, and I remember, quite well, the movements, the Black Power movements, etc. And there was many things that took place in this country that was to scar me for life, and help make me the person that I am. In all honesty, and I'm proud to say that I don't walk with the racist views and opinions that many others have walked with for many years and have kept them down. But I'm quite confident as an individual, which means that I make sure that I'm successful in all that I do, which is not always the same for everybody. But nonetheless, I've always been aware that I've had to work 10 times harder than the white man standing next to me on the line if I wanted to keep my job, for example.
Right.
And I had some very early experiences in school and just after I left school, when I first started to try to get into work, that put me on the life of crime. I was abused as a child by a white man who was a caretaker at the school next to my primary school at a very young age, brutally, in all honesty. And that would very much taint my thinking for all of my youth, and put a lot of hatred in my heart. But when you witness some of the, because I was also brutalized by police here in the UK as a young individual. Now, let me just make this clear. I'm not saying that I was an angel. I'm not trying to tell you that I was a law-abiding citizen. I was a hood. I was a boy in the streets. I was a ghetto. But the way we were treated didn't help. I can remember being arrested and absolutely beaten. There were times where we would just be beaten, put in the back of a van, beaten, and thrown out of the next corner. And that wasn't in the middle of committing a crime. That was just because the police felt like doing it. But my first real awareness of just how worldwide spread that was the Rodney King incident that was televised worldwide. And I think it was the first time that it gave us over here some understanding that we weren't alone in this.
Well,
Yeah. Can you remember what you were doing at the time of the Rodney King incident?
that was actually the first time that I protested as a youth. And I remember we were in San Francisco protesting, and I remember literally having to jump over cars with police behind me with their batons, and knowing if they caught me, I was done. And that was a wake-up call. That was a very crazy experience. And now, as the mother of 3 boys, I think of their safety quite often, that it doesn't even have to be a protest at this point. I mean, it's pretty clear it can be pretty much anything. I have my oldest is 18. He's in his first year of college. He's studying civil rights law, and he is, he has only had one experience so far, but thankfully he wasn't injured. But he was walking to a friend's house in a predominantly white part of town, and somebody called the police on him, and he was harassed and, went through a lot that day. And that was his first, and he was probably 16 years old at that point. And it's frightening. It's frightening. We want to protect our children, and the understanding. And this is something I've had a lot of workshops, and we've discussed this a lot. The discussion that every parent of a Black child has to have with their children at some point about what they do.
And
when,
the funny thing
when,
is...
it's not if, it's when. When the police come, regardless of whatever it is, how do you handle it? What do you do? How do you survive it? That is insane. That is, we're no longer, we don't have the discussions that Caucasian families have, where it's like, if there's some trouble, you call the police, they're going to come and rescue you. We have to have a discussion that this is how you survive the police. And that is insane. It's insanity.
I mean, apart from what I've witnessed myself, and the hundreds and thousands of individuals that I've come across one way or another in my lifetime, it's been a constant battle, just trying to be Black and equal in every way. And we had a whole series of miscarriages of justice over here in the UK up until the early 90s, I believe, was when it really started to settle down, after a case that I was involved with called the Cardiff 3. And this was a case where a white woman was murdered, a white prostitute, in a Black local community. She was dating a local Black guy who was a cocaine addict. She was a prostitute, a street girl. He was considered to be her pimp, but he was actually her boyfriend. And the chief of police went on national TV because they were looking for a white guy who was seen on the steps of the house that she was murdered in with blood on his hands in the early hours of the morning. And this went out nationwide. Nationwide appeal with a sketch of this guy, what this guy looked like, and a national cry to try and find him. And here's the problem: that particular area was down for refurbishment and redevelopment, multi-billions, and there was big conglomerate companies coming into the area to put their money in. They were gonna. It was right by the docks, so they were going to turn it into a marina with people coming in with their boats and their yachts and all sorts of stuff. And there's this unsolved crime sitting there, unsolved, that needs to be dealt with. And the police were then put under pressure to solve this case. So for 10 months, they're looking for this white individual who they believed was the murderer of this woman. And after 10 months of not being able to find this guy, the police went into the local Black community and arrested 3,000 Black men, and then whittled them down to 5, and put 5 Black men from the local community in the dock and charged them with murder. bearing in mind that they had forensic evidence, they had semen, they had saliva, and they had blood belonging to the culprit, the suspect, that didn't match any of the 5. And yet 3 of the 5 were found guilty and sentenced to life for murder. And yes, we campaigned and we campaigned. Fortunately for us, it only took us 4 years to get the case back to the Court of Appeal and to get them exonerated and freed, and rightly so. In fact, this very month, we celebrate 30 years since that case took place here in the UK. That was to change our justice system forever because of the extent of corruption and police contamination of evidence. This was to become a test case for anybody studying law of the what not to do. But up until then, we were very much in the same line as where you are in America right now, where you were lucky if you stood a chance of a fair trial if arrested for anything. You were going to say something there, Sevgi.
I wish there was a way for our country to get to that point. I knew there was corruption. What I've seen in the last 2.5 years is literally, I could not have even fathomed it. And
sorry to disturb you, but the thing is, our families, our parents, our ancestors were brought up as respecting, law-abiding citizens with a real discipline and respect for the truth and the law. And our mothers were the type that if the policeman brought us home after a whooping, then we'd get another whooping. You know, if the teacher sent us home from school having had the slipper or the cane, we'd get another one. You know.
Yeah.
So our families were not, oblivious to our wrongdoings, and were quite strict with us when it came to us messing around. We weren't raised to break the law. We weren't raised to be disrespectful. And because I know my mother was one who, if the police said you did it, then you must have done it. And that was the generation of my mother, and most of that generation were like that. If the police said you did it, you must have did it, because the police are the police. That's who they are. But somewhere along the line, our families began to realize that the police are not what we thought they were, and don't stand for what we thought that they were supposed to stand for. And I want to start breaking this down a little bit, because we were looking at the years, and I will skip from. I'll go. Sometimes I can go all over the place because I start getting all passionate and getting involved in stuff. And right now, the one thing that really stands out for me from 2015 was, because I think it was in December or November 2015, was the Mario Woods killing. Do you remember the Mario Woods killing?
Absolutely, that's in my neck of the woods, and I know his mother. 20
odd gunshot wounds in his buttocks, in his head, in his legs, and I remember them withholding that video for so long, and it was only the outbreak of that video that made people startled. It startled people. It shocked them how this man stood there and took all of those bullets. And that's the frightening thing when we start looking at what this killed by cops and police brutality is. We're not talking about hoodlums. We're not talking about thugs. We're not talking about gangbangers, rapists, bank robbers and murderers. 9 times out of 10, the people that we're talking about that are being killed by cops are people that are not even in the pursuit of criminal activity. That's the worrying aspect for me.
Absolutely.
Most of these that you represent, most of these that we've represented on this show over the years, have not been from a criminal background. They've not been in an active criminal pursuit at the time of the police chase or killing them. But Mario Woods, I mean, and I know you said, Michael Brown was a big one because that was we'll go back to that one shortly. But Mario Woods was another reawakening on top of the Michael Brown, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
And you said that that was in your neck of the woods. How did that particular killing pan out in your area? What was the response like there?
Well, I'm happy to say the response is still there. We have a very active community here in the Bay Area, and his death has really spurred a movement, I believe, in the community. And he, because of what he went through, there are still, there's foundations. His mother is very involved and shows up at many of the functions that we have throughout the Bay Area. And, I think it was sort of the catalyst that we had here that Michael Brown sort of was for Ferguson.
Let's just go there. So what was so significant about the Michael Brown incident, right, that was to raise such anger right across the country?
It's hard to say because in some sense you wish that it happened sooner and it happened for every other young person who was killed. I think that social media played a huge part in it, but the fact that he was such a young man and unarmed and killed so senselessly, and then I believe also that as we came to find out as a nation and the world how very corrupt and racially charged the Ferguson Police Department was, I think that played a huge part in it also growing the way that it did.
Yeah, I think when you start looking at when people know individuals and they know the innocence of the individuals, or they know they have some background, going back to the Cardiff 3 case, for example, out of the 5 people that were arrested and charged and put in the dock, one in particular was one that made everybody kind of think, well, hang on a minute, there's something not right here. I think the other 4 that were in the dock, I think people could have not easily believed that they would have done that, because I don't think anybody believed any of them would have done that. But I think they wouldn't have, 3 of them in particular were active criminals. One in particular was a drug dealer and a bit of a bully as well. So him being arrested and most people could have probably turned a blind eye to him being stitched up on a murder charge. But it was one of the guys who everybody knew, wouldn't have hung around with the other 4 guys, didn't live that kind of lifestyle, and wouldn't be seen dead walking with these guys to a bar, let alone befriending them to go and commit a murder. And I think certain things stand out that raises that anger. And I think with Michael Brown, I think the whole way that he was handled, the way that he was shot, the way that he was killed, raised an anger within people, even the criminals, I believe. their anger was raised. But
so unnecessary. It was so unnecessary.
And what sorts of protests did that trigger off at that time?
Michael Brown's death?
Yes.
It was nationwide, everywhere, for months. And it was pretty amazing to see. And again, it's sad that it took that long for us to come together. But I believe that his particular case and his particular death and the way that things went down and the way that the protests were handled, particularly in Ferguson, the way that the city handled things, it was like putting salt on a wound. It was, everybody that I knew was glued to the television who wasn't there, and everybody that I knew at some point was out in their cities. Here in the East Bay, I mean, highways were shut down, bridges were shut down, and it was sort of a real coming together of our nation. At least, I shouldn't say our nation, because our nation is full of a lot of hate and racism, but I believe that it brought together the communities of color in a way that it hadn't before, and it did bring a percentage of the white population that wasn't aware of what was going on into the story, and they were able to see this narrative that we live. And for that, I think it was another catalyst. Was it really did bring sort of a multiculturalism to the movement across the country.
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest outcome out of the Michael Brown killing, was the unification of all of the black organizations nationwide coming together for once in a unit, as opposed to, you know, all of these little individual pop-up groups, so to speak, wanting to take control of situations. Because that's always been our downfall, really, hasn't it? Is the way that we...
Absolutely. And that was one thing that the Black Panthers did so well, is that they really did unify. They unified people. It was pretty amazing. And that's something, sadly, we did not see last. That's something that's very frustrating for me as an individual, and also as somebody who's running an organization, and something that I know a lot of the people that we work with collaboratively are trying to bridge. How do we're all working towards the same goal. How do we bridge that and keep and come together as one? We can't have any egos involved. We can't have anybody with their own agendas. We really need to figure out how to get on the same page and unify. And this is across racial lines too. I mean, we've done a lot of work with the Native American community. They face a lot of the same issues that the Black community faces. They're working for the same things that we are, and collectively could really, I believe, make the changes necessary. But as long as we are divided in our little groups in our different states, it's to go up against this system that's been in place for hundreds of years, that is a lot of money behind it and a lot of power behind it. It's an impossible feat.
Agreed. And I mean, when you start looking at some of the other cases that were to become high profile, Darius Stewart's, Freddie Gray, and Philando Castile, which was a huge one over here in the UK. We didn't get Darius Stewart, we didn't get Freddie Gray, but we did get Philando Castile when when his girlfriend's video went viral on
Yeah,
social
they had
media.
no way to stop that.
No, and again, the rise of social media and smartphones has made it very difficult for police to continue to, not so much because they're still getting away with it, and that's we're going to come to that a little bit later, how they still manage to get away with it, even with the video footage that's coming up now. But it's now being challenged because it's now not going unseen. It's now being seen. People are recording these things now, and there are more. And that's one of the advantages that we have in modern day, is that we have the smartphone and people are using it to reveal the wickedness and the corruption that the police are going on with. And that Philando Castile, that was another basic opportunity for the law to do the right thing, right?
Absolutely, but I mean, I don't know anyone who could watch that video and say that was justified. Yet, what was the outcome? He was acquitted of all the charges.
And I suppose even and again we've still got an hour and 15 minutes, and but trust me, we've got so much more to go through, and I want to come to how we combat that, how we tackle that, how we get through that a little bit later on. But again, just trying to focus on the whats and the whys and the hows at this moment in time. When you look at how that was broadcasted, because that video, again, when I said at the beginning that we don't normally get the United States news here in the UK unless it's something that goes viral like that.
Right.
And it didn't hit our news until it hit social media, and it's only because it hit social media that it got to our news. The other one was Laquan McDonald. Laquan McDonald, it was only when the Supreme Court ordered them to release the tapes, the video footage, that it actually became national over here. It got on our news. Most of the cases that that take place over there, unfortunately, you guys you're fighting it alone, because the powers that be over there don't release that information or that footage, or it's controlled, regulated. It doesn't get out, so you actually haven't got the rest of the world fighting with you unless it goes.
It doesn't get out here. Wow. It does not get out here. Some cases do. Very, very few. Very, very few. If they get out, it's one news channel here, one news channel there. It's very controlled. It is, I mean, I have two sides of my family. I have one side that's very well aware of what's going on, and another side that has no clue. They have a general idea, but the media does not share these things on a nationwide scale for the most part. It's not just not getting to you. It's not getting to most of us.
So, therefore, social media has played the biggest part in keeping
Absolutely.
the stories of the lives of these individuals that are taken from us
Absolutely
prominent in the minds of the people.
Absolutely, and it's played the biggest part in us organizing across the country to challenge this as well.
So, when we were looking at this earlier on, and we were talking about, and again, I'm still in 2015. I haven't got to 2016 yet. California seems to be one of the biggest hitting areas. I know in 2016 there were 161 killed in California. In 2015 there were 211 killed by cops. And the percentage,
that feels low to me, and I do believe that, and I may be mistaken, but I do believe that is only if it's a firearm is used.
Yes.
We have people in our organization, women that I know, that have the police have killed their loved ones with tasers or in body wraps, and they don't go reported. And then I know that James Nate Greer's was killed in Hayward, and his wife Dee Naw, she has been fighting to make sure that it is always reported, regardless of how the person dies at the hands of police. And I think that's really important. I don't think we have any real statistics on how many people are dying because of the regulations on how things are reported.
No, you're quite right. And these statistics that they do put up are only those that are killed by guns.
Yeah.
And then they state whether the individuals were armed or unarmed. And 90-odd% of those that are killed by cops are actually unarmed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you've been doing this for about 2 odd years. What are the high-profile cases that have come across that have really stood out for you?
Well, I'll preface it with saying that we made a decision very early on not to take any high-profile cases, because when your case goes high profile and you're on the national news and you're in the papers and things have gone viral, you have attorneys coming to you. You have resources that other families just don't have. And it's it's next to impossible for a family who doesn't have the financial resources to hire high-power attorneys to take on police departments when they don't get that coverage. So our cases are usually ones that have not been heard of or have had very little coverage. But I think that summer of 2016 and the Philando Castile and Alton Sterling both dying very close to one another was something that sort of, I think, aside from Michael Brown and Oscar Grant and Mario Woods, was another sort of big pushing point for our country. That was one where we did see major nationwide protests again. Our organization had, in about 7 days, organized rallies in 12 different states.
That's Oscar Grant. That's Uncle Bobby's boy, right?
Yes, Uncle Bobby. He's an amazing man.
Yeah, I've had Uncle Bobby on the show too.
Yeah, he's an amazing man. I'm very lucky to have met him, and we all try to learn from him. He's pretty incredible.
But you're quite right. The Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, because I remember that, very close to each other. In fact, was it not roughly about the same week?
Yeah.
And that it was phenomenal. The outcry and the outpouring of pain and anger. That didn't just pour out from your country. I saw countries all over the world via social media displaying their outrage and expectation that justice would be done. And yet, time after time after time, we see these individuals constantly getting away from it, getting away with it, when all the evidence points towards that somebody needs to be indicted.
Absolutely, it's.
I hear your frustration already.
Yeah.
and it's so difficult not to get frustrated when you see a clear case of injustice. And nobody's answering to it, because isn't that what the foundation of life is? That yes, for every action there's a reaction, there's a consequence. But when we're seeing no consequence for those that are blatantly and obviously bending the law to suit their own purposes, how do they expect to be able to keep the masses in line? But going back to Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, and the way that the people was the outpouring of anger spilled out. Is it not surprising that the level of violence or anger did not cause more disruption and damage than it did? Because you were talking about a nation of angry people.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, those of us who are organizing realize that the moment that happens, our power and our voices are gone, absolutely gone. And it's very frustrating when we do mobilize and there's the few individuals who riot and cause issues, because, I mean, of course, we are all angry. I mean, seething. But that takes away our voices completely. And then you can watch it immediately. What does the media focus on? The rioting, the violence, this, that. It's not on the police. It's not on the corruption. It's not on the life lost unnecessarily, the murder, but a state-sanctioned murder. That's all out the window. So I think that for the most part, we get it at this point. We had, within a week of their deaths, Together We Stand organized rallies across the country and up in Toronto. And there was not one bit of violence in any city that we had a rally in. Philadelphia, we had probably 600-700 people at City Hall, and it was amazing to see. We had people of every single race, religion, ethnicity there together for the same purpose, which is to say that this is not okay, and we are coming together against this. It was a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, that momentum does not stick. And that's I think where we run into an issue.
You know, police brutality is not just about those that they kill and get away with. There are many people who are left scarred for life, having encountered police, and have found themselves beaten, bruised, you know, and then criminalized in order for the police to be able to justify what they did, and that's, you know, now you start looking at the likes of Sandra Bland, who did eventually die in police hands, but it was them brutalizing her and then trying to justify what they did that led to her death anyway.
Right.
That makes them accountable, full stop. And
right.
and now you're talking about generations of people, instead of growing up respecting the law, hate the law. Now, I've had several former chiefs of police and law enforcement officers on this show, including, in my opinion, the Right Honourable Cheryl Dorsey.
She's amazing.
We love Cheryl. And when Cheryl was on the show, we talked about the old community cop. Remember the old community cop, the guy that used to walk the beat? And 9 times out of 10, if you had a problem in the community, the sergeant could send the local Bobby down, who was well known by everybody, you know, who could probably get to the bottom of the matter much quicker than sending in the Gestapo. And,
absolutely.
But the community cop has been replaced by these robotic morons who come in brandishing their guns and their batons.
Militarized.
And they don't have no communication skills. One of the questions, here's something, right? Here's one of the questions that I remember asking in one of my very early police brutality shows. I asked a former police officer, law enforcement officer, what's the stats on female officers killing unarmed individuals? black men. And there were no stats. And so I asked, why was that? And the question was, well, they handle it differently. So my response was, well, if they handle it differently, why don't we just send them in every time? You know, because you would have imagined if anybody was going to be in fear of their life, it would be a female officer confronted by a potential thug or hoodlum.
Right.
But yet we don't have no stats for females pulling out their guns and shooting and screaming out they were in fear of their life. So do you think that there is a different... Have you seen yourself a difference between the way that female officers handle a potential volatile situation to the way that the male would?
I mean, I do think that we don't have a lot of data or experience with that. I mean, we did have in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a female officer, Betty Shelby. She fatally shot Terrence Crusher after his car stalled on the side of the road, and that was all pretty much videotaped and on social media. And she was, of course, you know, there was an acquittal there. He was unarmed. It was just so I mean, I think that in my inclination as a woman and is to think that probably is the case, and given that we don't have a lot of statistics of women police officers killing folks, I would assume that there is some validity to that. However, I do really have concerns at this point that the majority, and I will preface with this, there are some very incredibly stand-up, wonderful law enforcement officers out there.
Agreed.
Absolutely, hands down. But I do believe that our police force in the United States is becoming more and more militarized, as you said, sort of robotic. And I don't know that if we keep going in this direction, the gender of the officer will make a difference, because the culture within law enforcement is so violent and the value of life seems to be so low that it's.
Were you aware that a lot of the American police force and states now have been using Israeli military forces to train their officers?
Absolutely. There's actually, and I wanted to make sure to bring this up for your listeners to check into. There's an organization called the Jewish Voice for Peace, and they do some incredible work. They have launched a campaign last year called deadlyexchange.org, and it has a petition, and they're doing a lot of work to educate folks, because very few people, you're one of the very few people that I've spoken to that is aware that this is going on, that they are literally, we're sending ICE, we're sending Border Patrol, we're sending local police, and they are training with the Israeli military, and they're coming back here, and we're seeing a lot of death. So anyways, yeah, I want to make sure that folks are aware of that, and that they can go to deadlyexchange.org and learn all about that campaign to stop it and to educate people and all about what's actually going on, because it's really quite frightening. And I would venture to say that the percentage of people in the world that are aware of this is very, very low. And it's having very detrimental, life-taking results here in our country, at least.
Well, absolutely. It's having that very same effect in Israel. So would it not have the same effect in America? And the bottom line is, if you've got officers who are coming out with a military mentality, then in their minds they're going to war. They're not going to combat crime. They're going to war. They're soldiers. And there's a different mentality required to be a soldier than one to be a peacekeeping police officer, law enforcement officer. Because that's what you're meant to be keepers of the peace.
Right. And a lot of our military, when they come back, are becoming police officers. And there's no training to shift from a war mentality to a community policing mentality. And I've heard of many, many cases where people have died and the person shooting the gun was former military.
Yes, we've heard of many. And you're quite right, deadlyexchange.org, which I'm kind of just looking at now and reading a little bit on while I'm talking to you, tells a lot about ending US-Israel police partnerships and reclaiming safety on the streets, which is what its headlines on its site says. But when you've got soldiers or people with soldier mentality coming out into your community, then the likelihood is that somebody's going to lose their life. And one of the things that we need to start talking about and looking at is how we change that. Because the community officer, the police Bobby, the street Bobby as we know it, has disappeared and has been replaced by a robotic, computerized version of a soldier who, when sent into an area, a community, or an incident, goes in with his gun hand ready. And at the slightest move, there's no hesitation in pulling out that gun and firing it. And we're not always talking about a violent confrontation or responding to an act of violence. So one of the things that needs to be looked at is the recruitment policy for recruiting officers, which is something that has been highlighted on many occasions on this show. The way that the officers are recruited, the type of people that they recruit, the mentality of those that recruit, and where they recruit them from. Because when you're talking about the rise of white supremacy in America today, there are people that are joining the police force not because they want to keep the peace, but because they want to exact revenge.
Absolutely.
So
we've seen police chiefs, we've seen all the way down the line where it's come out that they've been involved with the KKK or white extremist groups, and it's crazy. And you're hitting on a very important point, which is our selection process for law enforcement and our training process for law enforcement. They have to change. We need, I believe, very thorough psychological evaluations happening on every single officer that's brought into a police force. And I also believe that that can't happen just one time. It needs to be something that happens periodically, because we are giving the power to take a life in a moment's notice to these people. And so I also believe the education level of our police force needs to be heightened. We have more stringent requirements for pretty much every other job than we do. I mean, you can be a high school graduate and go into law enforcement without a whole lot of testing and a whole lot of training, and it's pretty frightening. I mean, I really believe that if we are giving people the power to make life and death decisions for us and who are supposed to protect and serve our communities, their level of education and training should be pretty damn high.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the bottom line is, when you're recruiting people who lack knowledge, who lack information, who lack education, who have little understanding of other cultures and heritages, and bearing in mind here, one of the biggest bugbears that I've got and we have over here in the UK is your lack of understanding for mental health. Not yours, but the police force's lack of understanding for mental health. None of your officers are actually mentally health trained. So you've had several incidences where individuals have been shot and killed by police officers who do not have no understanding of what the mental health behavior is.
And that actually prompted us to start a study this past year looking into the mental health crisis training of law enforcement, what's working, what's not, what needs to be implemented. It's been a slow-going process because it is extremely difficult to get law enforcement to discuss anything. So we've spoken with several training groups that have done this sort of work, but what we've found overall is that majority of law enforcement officers get no more than 16 hours of mental health crisis training, and a huge percentage of those folks are actually not the people that are out on the street dealing with the people.
No, they're the sergeants back at the station.
Right, and it's, we decided to do this because we've had a lot of families come into our organization who've lost their children while they were in a mental health crisis. And my background is in psychology and did my undergrad and graduate work in that. And it's really disturbing. One of the cases that will always haunt me and stick with me was David Joseph. He's out of Austin. He was 17 years old. He was having a mental health, breakdown. He was running down the street completely naked. It was all caught on the officer's dash cam. Not armed, completely naked. Clearly something's wrong. And he was shot dead by this officer. And of course, no charges were brought up. The police chief did immediately fire him, but it's I think of my sons, and if God forbid something happened, that they had some sort of a break and they needed help. And this kid could not have possibly posed a threat in any real way, having no weapon. There's so many ways the cop could have dealt with this that would not have ended his life, and that was his first choice. It's just horrifying. It's horrifying. These young kids are dying because there is not proper training, and ultimately there's not any accountability. And I really believe that if these people knew that if they took a life, they were going to have a severe price to pay, they would think twice. But that does not exist.
There was that high profile, and I'm trying to remember his name. There was an individual whose mother called the police. They were well known to the local officers. He had a history of mental health related issue. He had no acts of violence, no issues as far as assault or aggravated violence was concerned. And the police turned up at the house because he hadn't been taking his medication. She called the police for help, as she often did when he started to misbehave and not take his tablets. And they turned up at the house, and he had a screwdriver in his hand. He wasn't being offensive. He hadn't been attacking her. In fact, she was stood next to him, and they shot him dead on his doorstep.
Yeah.
and there are numerous amounts of cases where officers have killed where mental health is concerned. And let me just add this to the mix, because when police officers, when cops are called to an incident where somebody is known to have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol, then they are in a state of mental health. And I'm not sure that the officers understand that these individuals under the influence of either alcohol or drugs are actually in a state of mental health, because their mental health is affected and influenced by whatever substance that they're using.
Right.
Their behavior, their demeanor, their actions, everything is determined and controlled by whatever substance that they're using. So these individuals are in a state of mental health. Now, here in the UK, we have what's called a crisis team. And do you know that here in the UK, the police do not go and respond to a mental health related issue without the crisis team? They support the crisis team, and the crisis team intervention team, they go in first, supported by the police, because they are the professionals who know how to talk to these individuals, and they have the medication handy to be able to resolve the situation without it turning into some murderous killing spree. So
yeah, absolutely. And there are some cities that have partnered with, there are some police departments that have mental health crisis units on call, and they sort of work together. And that's ultimately what we need, because there is no reasonable way to train all of our law enforcement to deal with all of the multitude of issues that come with mental health and all of the different disorders.
Absolutely not. But what there is there are basic training programs such as understanding mental health, which are not degree orientated courses.
Absolutely.
But they're beginners, basics that every police officer should actually have to undergo as part of his initial training, not 10 years experience as a sergeant, but his initial training, so that when he approaches a situation, he can actually be able to understand that there's something that's not quite right going on here, and he needs to deal with this differently.
Yeah, it needs to be mandatory, and it needs to be mandatory for every officer that is working within the community. The fact that the higher ups are the ones getting most of the training, and they don't have any real one-on-one access and interaction with the community, is ridiculous. And I absolutely agree with you.
And then you have the officers themselves who are also going through mental health related issues.
Absolutely, especially if they are former military. We know PTSD,
stress disorders and the like. And prescription drugs is on a high because they're legal, right? And the amount of officers who are taking prescription drugs over a long period of time to deal with injuries or stuff, these are also suffering a state of mental health.
Absolutely.
So you've got a mental health orientated officer trying to challenge a ordinary situation with his mentally ill state of mind, and you've got the armed. Yeah, don't forget that part. Armed, and he's in fear of his life. So my question has to be, if you're always in fear of your life, why are you doing this job?
Yeah, if I hear that phrase one more time, I might punch myself. I was in fear of my life. It's the mantra. Every time someone's killed, I feared for my life. Feared for my life.
Do you know, you looked at 1,100 odd people killed by cops in 2015. There was 1,000, I think, and 63 killed in 2016. They're saying it's 987 in 2017. But again, we're still only talking about those that were killed by gun, shot dead.
Right.
In fact, the total for 2015 2015 was closer to 2,000, and the figure for 2016 was near 1,700. And already for 2018, we're on 126, and we haven't finished February yet. So going on the rate that we're going on now, we're looking on close to 2,500 for this year, if we continue to go at the rates that we're going at now.
And you know, if you look at the state of our country, our current administration, but that's not far off. I mean, we're heading there very, very rapidly. We have an administration that condones, endorses, promotes racism, hate, guns, law enforcement. The very first day he took office, within the first hour of Trump taking office, the civil rights page with all of the information that Obama's administration had up was taken down, and a pledge to back law enforcement was up in its place. That's how we started, the very first hour of his administration.
Were you surprised that Donald Trump was elected president?
No, absolutely not. I think that Obama being elected really...
Go on, say it, because if you don't, I will.
I will say it, trust me. Him being elected and being in control for 8 years made every single person in this country who had any iota of racism just fueled it, and they could not stand
it was a how dare they put a black man in the White House.
Absolutely. How dare this person be in that office? They aren't going to be my president, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to make sure that never, ever happens again. And I am not surprised at all. I literally, the racism we're seeing under Trump started under Obama, because him being elected, we started to see, because before that, there was this sort of air about things where it's like, oh, racism is in the past. It's not like it used to be. People sort of put their head in the sand. And once Obama was elected, it came out. It came out. People's hate came out. Their true colors came out. It was out there. And now we have a guy who is very vocally endorsing it and promoting it, and it's, emboldening it. And we see this with these, the shooting that happened here the other day. We've got just people that are full of hate, and
so here's the thing. Fatal shootings by police remain relatively unchanged after 2 to 3 years. If fatal shootings by police remained unchanged after 2 to 3 years, why isn't change imminent?
I
mean, if you got something so drastically wrong so consistently, wouldn't you expect to see a change of something? I mean, if you was running a business, right, and day in and day out, you realize you was making the same mistake over and over and over again, wouldn't you change something?
But see, that's the thing we're going back to again, which is the people who have the real power and control in this country do not see this as a problem, because the majority of the people being killed are people of color who, that's just not an issue.
See, until it starts getting personal, right, until it starts affecting them, they're not going to want to make no change.
Absolutely not.
In 2015, the number of whites per million that were killed were 2.95%, and in 2016, it was 2.9, it hasn't changed. But I'll tell you what has changed. The Native Americans and the blacks have swapped places. In 2016, the Native Americans went up to 10.13 per million, 6.66 per black, but 2.9 white. It stayed the same.
Right.
And when you imagine, so that's phenomenal change from 2015 to, and we don't have the same figures or same stats for 2017 or 18, but going on that sort of trend, the number of blacks and Native Americans that are killed in America by cops are rising every year. They continually rise every year, and nothing's being put in place to reduce the amount of killings that are taking place for these innocent, because that for me is because when somebody is not, when you have that many people killed who are not in pursuit of criminal activity, they're not driving a getaway car, they haven't just murdered somebody or raped somebody, you haven't killed them having raided a house that you've gone to arrest somebody for, and they're reaching for the kitchen knife or something. These, I'm not saying that they would be justified, but I don't think people would be that angry about. They're understandable, they're explainable. I could understand you being in fear of your life because you're dealing with a known hoodlum, a known thug, somebody who's known to use violence, somebody who's known to be violent, who will use a weapon, who will attack you, who will hurt you. So therefore, self-preservation is a must. We get all of that. But when you're in pursuit of someone who has no criminal records, who don't have, and they get this information, a lot of the time they have this information when they're in pursuit of these individuals. They know that this guy is not known to be violent. So why aren't the whole, and forget the recruiting is a major part, but the training of police officers to deal with provocative situations, potentially volatile situations. The training to deal with that has to be where the change starts. Because if every officer goes into every situation with the mindset that I got my gun and I will use it, he's more than likely going to pull out his gun and use it.
Yeah.
Another question for you, Sevgi. Do you think that the gun control plays a significant role in the amount of people being killed on the streets today? Or the lack of gun control?
Well, I mean, certainly. My stance is this. I don't believe that there is any reason at all whatsoever that any person outside of the military would ever need any sort of high-powered assault rifle. I have never hunted in my life, but I can't imagine that that's something necessary to do, to have for that sport. I just do not see any reasonable circumstance in which a civilian would ever need to have that type of weapon. And clearly there's a real issue with screening and who's allowed to get guns and all of that. But I mean, certainly the issue of gun control is a major one. And again, we are up against high-powered, deep-pocket whites who've run this country for a long time, who are behind, what happens with those gun control laws, and so it's a steep battle to fight.
So the gun control laws, right, are one thing, but you've just had another individual go absolutely crazy in a school, killing 17. Right. He's been reported over 39 times. The officers have had to go to the house to deal with this particular individual. The amount of complaints and reports that was made on him. But that's not the surprising thing for me. I'll tell you what the surprising thing for me is this, that somebody who kills 17 people armed to the teeth was arrested alive.
That's the first thing all of us said was, had he been a black man, he'd have been dead the moment they saw him. And the fact that he was arrested alive, not only arrested alive, but they called an ambulance for him because he was limping. I mean, it's insane. It's insane.
The guy that shot the 9 in the Baptist church, he was arrested alive.
And they bought him McDonald's.
And time after time after time, we hear of all of these individuals who are going into schools or colleges or workplaces who are killing multiple people, and they've been taken alive. And these are armed with high velocity weapons. And yet we're talking about individuals who are unarmed, not in the pursuit of criminal activity, being shot dead, most of the time in their backs, with police claiming that they were in fear of their life.
It even goes deeper than that. I mean, we've had a number of cases where the police have killed folks and claimed that it was a suicide. I mean, it goes that deep.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, one young man, his name's DeLandre Minifield Brown. He was running from the police with a friend of his after a traffic stop, and shot in the back of the head, and they claimed he did that to himself. It's going to trial in July, thankfully. Most cases don't get that far. But it's just amazing.
It's probably frustrating. It's more frustrating for you than it is for us, because you're living it on a day-to-day basis. You're seeing it. You're witnessing it. You're working amongst the families that are suffering and are going through it, that are losing their children, and you're living in states where it could happen to you tomorrow. So how do you prepare yourself? How do you prepare your children? How do you leave home feeling safe, knowing that this is what you could encounter at any given time?
We have to still live. I think that we just try our very best to prepare our children. It's interesting because I have boys of various ages. My oldest, 18, we've had all the deep discussions and how, if you're pulled over, this is what you do. And I've actually instructed him that if he's pulled over, he should call 911 and have them on the phone and let the police officer know that he has them on the phone. If he's pulled over for no reason and he's fearing for his life, that's what he needs to do. Like there has to be some sort of insurance, although that's not always or most of the time enough. Well, you just have to try to prepare them as best you can. Never, ever, ever have your hands out of sight. Never, ever, ever reach for anything. I mean, it's awful. And, as my kids grow, I try to discuss things age appropriately with them. And I think that's all as parents we can do is try to arm them with as much information as possible. There's a lot of organizations that are doing Know Your Rights workshops so that kids can go and people can go in general and know if I'm pulled over, what are my rights? It's a difficult and frightening time.
How did you feel when you had the how can I put it? When you had the referred rednecks up in the water issue, where they were holding off the FBI at gunpoint, blatantly, with all the media attention, and they were protesting. Armed.
It's pretty enraging. It's enraging. It's
and
It just a very clear. I mean, it seems that there's a consistently clear message coming from law enforcement and from government that we are not equal. The laws of equality and the laws to the protecting citizens do not apply to us, but they do to anybody walking around in white skin. And it's enraging.
John Crawford was in Walmart on the phone to his girlfriend, and while he was walking down the aisle, he spotted a beanie gun or whatever it was. It wasn't a proper gun. On the shelf. He had it in his hand as he continued to walk down the aisle and talk to his girlfriend. In America, you have this thing called swatting, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an individual in the supermarket who calls 911 and tells them that there's a black man running around the supermarket pointing a gun at people. 911, the officers arrive on scene, and within 3.2 seconds, John Crawford was dead. Now, here's my observation, because I don't know if you ever saw the footage on that. The video that was then released had the 911 call run parallel with the CCTV footage of John Crawford in a Walmart, as the guy was making the call and John Crawford was in the aisle talking on the phone. And at one point, the guy on the making the 911 call says, he's pointing the gun at a woman and a child now. And you see a woman and a child go across the top of the aisle, nowhere near him, goes across the aisle where he was standing 3/4 of the way down. John Crawford doesn't even look at them or have a conversation with them or anything. But my concern was this. The police arrived on site. There was nobody running out of the store screaming, "Oh, he's got a gun, he's got a gun!" Right? They walked into the store, right? There was no shop workers running around ducking for cover. They didn't ask for a manager or try to find out or ascertain whether or not there was a situation going on. They walked into the store, went down the aisle, and shot John Crawford within 3.2 seconds of them arriving on site. And still there was no indictment. What confidence does this young generation have in America to be law-abiding citizens when they cannot trust the basic laws that are put in place supposedly to protect them?
Absolutely none. I don't think any of us sitting on this side of things has any confidence at all whatsoever. And I think as folks become more and more educated, the confidence level will drop immensely. I opened the show saying I truly had no idea the depth that this stuff goes. We have one case in particular, if I can share a bit about it with you.
Absolutely. That
would sort of enlighten folks to the depths of things. I don't know if you've heard of the saying, the good old boys. That's sort of saying that kind of goes for how things are and were down in the South, referring to sort of the good old boy network is the white men running the show, and really there's nothing you can do about it. This is a case that is actually from 2013, and I'm just going to share a few of the details with you. The man that died, Marcus Merritt, was father, estranged with his ex-wife, and preparing to move to Texas. Killed on July 4th, 2013. The estranged wife had a personal relationship with the chief of police. None of the protocol was ever followed in this case at all whatsoever. Normally, the sheriff's department would come and investigate any sort of a death. The chief of police showed up and sent them away. The next day, the mattress that he supposedly, they said it was a suicide. The next day, the ex-wife and her parents went back to the house, burned the mattress. Medical examiner never was on scene. He supposedly shot himself in the mouth. There was no evidence of a gunshot wound at all at the funeral home. At any point in time, did anybody see any sort of trauma? After a couple of years of his mother, Royce Eckley, being very diligent in asking for every piece of paperwork and every single thing, we met up with her and worked with her and an organization called MJA Inc. They do cold cases and investigative work, and we did a national call to action asking for the body to be exhumed because there was no autopsy done. They weren't providing any crime scene photos. At that time, they said there were no crime scene photos. I mean, I'm telling you the story to just give people an idea of the level of corruption that occurs and the difficulty families have in getting justice. We were able to force the Louisiana State Police to exhume Marcus's body, and that was the first time that any of the detectives on the case had ever heard of that being done. But unfortunately, that is not where things ended. We got a report 8 months later with 3 paragraphs on it, basically stating that it was a suicide. They didn't provide any of the full report of any of the evidence. We were told that there was no tox screen done, and it was just simply ruled a suicide. In September of this past year, somebody, we're not sure who, and I don't know that we'll ever know, sent us the full file. And we now know that tox screens were done, that Marcus was drugged to the point that anybody would be completely catatonic. We know that crime scene photos were taken. We know that the sheriff did make a complaint. That never got anywhere. And the state of Louisiana has stonewalled us ever since. And so we're working very, very diligently now to get the Department of Justice involved, because clearly we have law enforcement all the way down to the bottom, all the way up through the Louisiana State Police, not concerned about justice, not concerned about this family, these children who lost their father, this woman who lost her son. They're concerned about covering something, and we're not sure who or what, but mattresses aren't burned the day after someone dies when you're supposed to be mourning. Protocol isn't broken all the way along the line if you're doing the right thing. If an autopsy is done correctly, you're going to do all of the tests and you're going to let the people know what was found. You're not going to say these tests weren't ever done and then the full file comes out later and we see that it was. So it's just, I tell you this because this is what families face. This is what families face. And this family has faced it with no major media coverage, unless you are very deeply involved in social justice. You probably haven't heard of Marcus Merritt Sr. You probably don't know anything about this. And there's so many families going through the same thing.
I will surprise you. Royce Eckley is somebody that I'm speaking to at the moment, and we will be doing that on a show very soon.
That's wonderful. She's an amazing woman, and I'm currently in contact with her. Yeah, we've become very close, and to see what she's gone through, just to find out what happened to her son is truly unbelievable. But that's the depth of what we're dealing with here. There's no accountability. We have police departments who cover up for each other. The few police officers who have actually been whistleblowers have faced incredible just threats, blackballing. I mean, you name it. And it's
well, you take somebody like Mary Stewart, for example, Darius Stewart's mother.
Yes. Yes.
She spent a long time in the wilderness because she had no resources.
Absolutely.
She had no Wi-Fi, so she didn't have access to social media. She wasn't even aware of all of the support that was in her favor, and she wasn't able to respond to any of it because she was going through a financial problem at the time as well. So things were very difficult for her, and I think it's only now Mary Stewart has become a bit more vocal and prominent on protests or marches or speaking. But she's been a long time in the wilderness, unable to tell the story of her son.
And they will not release a police report to her. We have ourselves done a Freedom of Information Act for her. We have. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's heartbreaking. Gilda Baker is another one.
Gilda Baker, we've worked with for quite a long time. We've done rallies with her. That one is just incredible. Her son was Diallo Neal. Yeah. We have many witnesses stating, and this is from an investigation done by a 30-year police officer. Many witnesses stating that a CHP officer hit his bike and killed him and left the scene. And we can't get anywhere. We have filed every single paperwork we can think of, from Citizen Police Review Board to Internal Affairs to dealing with the police department, dealing with CHP. We've sent stuff to the Attorney General, and we can't get anywhere. All that they have to do is say, we didn't have anybody in that area at that time. That's all they have to do.
Yeah, we had Gilda on this show in absolute tears, telling the story, and my heart goes out to her and many more families like hers, because the list just goes on and on and on. You can just keep on going through the alphabet and come up with another name of a family that's just going through something quite similar to all of what we've just been talking about. And you've got people that are living in hope, but not sure where that hope's going to come from, because justice just doesn't seem to be done.
No.
I mean, we've only got a few minutes left, Sevgi, and again, I told you it was going to happen, didn't I? 2 hours was just going to fly by, and and half of probably what we were planning to discuss, we haven't even got to yet, because there was just so much underlying the surface of this, that to get to the real truth of this, it's almost impossible to get to the real heart of this, because at the end of the day, we've got our young men and women dying on the streets, and it looks like, it feels like nobody cares but us.
It's awful, and that's one reason that we're committed to these families that don't have a voice, that don't have any sort of national media coverage. It's just, and watching what these mothers have gone through is just,
and this is why we've got to keep on telling these stories. This is why we've got to keep putting it out there. This is why we've got to use social media in any way we can in order to keep this in the news, because they don't.
Absolutely.
They don't keep it in the news. If there was one change that you'd like to see change take place, what would that be?
Oh my God, really? One?
Well,
I think that the one thing that stands out in my mind is that we all come together across racial lines, across religious lines. We're all fighting for the same cause, and we really need to unify. That's when our voice will be the most powerful, and we certainly have a powerful opponent, and as long as we are divided and spread out and not all on the same page, I just don't see this getting where we need it to be.
I suppose part of that problem is having all of these different organizations all claiming to want to be the representative, as opposed to unifying and sort of like trying to take on the same cause.
Yeah, and that's why I said, there's no room at all whatsoever for anyone's ego in this. I'm not, it is about preserving life and achieving equality and having a safe place for our children to grow up, and it really nothing else beyond that matters. And I think everybody needs to focus on that. It's not on whose organization does what or who, it's about how do we form a coalition that really can make a difference.
And yes, and it feels like it's going to be a harder battle to be able to get any of that in place with the Donald Trump in the Oval.
Yes. It's certainly an uphill battle, but I really I've had the honor of meeting some incredible people on this journey who are doing amazing work, and I think that we'll get there. I really do.
Well, we have to, because we believe in a God, and we believe in a God that is over and bigger than all of these things, and that's where our hope has to come from.
Absolutely.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go?
I think I'd just like to put out there just a few Facebook pages that people can go to learn about some of these cases that don't have a lot of attention and families that need support.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'll start out with Justice for Marcus Merritt Sr. You go on Facebook and you can find it, Justice for Marcus Merritt Sr., Justice for Delondre Minifield Brown, D''Londre. Justice for Josiah. His mother, Lori Valdez, is one of the champions in our area. And
Lori Valdez is one of my very, very good friends who's been on this show several times.
She's an amazing woman.
Absolutely, without doubt.
Yeah, and Justice for Diallo Neal, Gilda's son. justice for Christopher Calgione. He was a young man with mental health issues up in Oregon who was killed. There's just so many, and I encourage people to seek out the information because it isn't readily available unless you're part of the community at this point of doing social justice work, and certainly we can't rely on mainstream media to bring it to us. So I just want people to educate themselves and to start to take some action.
Well, Sevgi, what I'm really sorry about is it took us this long to get connected. What I'm really hopeful for is that we're going to be able to get together again. I want to put together another show where there's 3 or 4 of you, and we're looking at how changes, reforms, ideas, positively to take this forward. There's many people. Yeah, there's many people that want to take part in that, and I'd like to be able to put you forward as one of them that can come back and revisit, and we can talk about this again.
That would be my pleasure.
Well, Sylvia, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing with us what you have. And again, I know you're with child, so so we're going to kind of let you go, and hopefully everything is going to work out well for you. And I pray peace for your family. I
appreciate it, and thank you for doing this show and getting the voices that need to be heard out there. It really does mean a lot to all of us.
Well, thank you for appearing on the show, and I look forward to speaking with you again real soon.
Absolutely.
You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity.
Well, there you have it.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Sevgi Fernandez.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Next week I got live Latara Smith.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Then I'll be taking a break for a weekend, and I shall be back on the week of the 10th of March.
In the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all.
But that's it for now on World Jam Global Radio and Issues Today.
Too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets.
126 killed by cops this year already.
Very quick on my feet.
And we're only on February the 17th.
I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now I sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. Already did my time, I paid for my crime. I'm I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't